Well, good morning, everybody. It is great to see you this morning. Let's get myself situated here. Sorry about that. If you have your Bibles, open them up to the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3 is where we're going to be at this morning. If you don't have a Bible and you need one, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get one to you. We definitely want you to have a Bible in your hand, so raise your hand up and we'll get that to you. Daniel 3 is where we're at. We're just going through the book of Daniel together. It's part of who we are as a church. We go through books of the Bible together, looking at it in a systematic, expository fashion, gaining insight and wisdom from God's Word about what He has to say. And this morning, we're going to be taking the first half of Daniel chapter 3. And if you are familiar with Daniel chapter 3, then just know we're not going to get to the part that you think we're going to get to today, all right? So we're going to get right up to it, and then we're going to do that next time. We'll be going through that today. But I'm excited about just being able to jump into this with you guys together today in Daniel 3. A relationship with God is mutually exclusive. It's like a marriage. That when you're thinking about your relationship with God, it's this thing that is very much dedicated and singular in that in the same way that my wife, Micah, she can't be one of the women I love, right? I mean, even saying that, doesn't that feel a little bit weird? Even me saying that, and some of the women are like starting to ball up fists and they're getting ready to punch me in the head, and that's appropriate. That's right. That's the way that it should be. She can't be that. She's got to be my only love, not one of my loves. Otherwise, my love for her is not genuine, it's not true, it's not real. It's something that is not a devoted kind of a thing. You see, real and true love is that I have forsaken all others and devoted myself entirely and solely to her. That's the kind of relationship that makes a marriage relationship work. And if that's not the terms of a marriage relationship, then it cannot work. It just doesn't. It will always fall apart. It will always become corrupted and destroyed. And so too it is with our relationship with God. In fact, 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 tells us this. It says it like this: "Do not love this world or the things it offers you, for when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you." That's a pretty direct statement, isn't it? Now, when it says the word world, it's not speaking of, there's three possible words for the word, terms or definitions for the word world. It could mean the earth, the dirt. It's not talking about that. It could mean the people. The people, we talk about the world, we could mean the people. It's not talking about that. But there's a third term that the word world can mean, and that is the system of the world that is directed against, slanted against Jesus. And that's exactly what it's talking about. That when we are called out of the world system, we're called out of the world and the slant of the world and chasing down whatever it is that you think is right and appropriate. We're told here in 1 John that you can't have both. You've got to love either the world or you've got to love the Lord. You can't have both. And that's the kind of relationship that Jesus offers to us, and it's the kind of relationship that He expects for us to have for Him, because real and true relationship with God is the same as marriage. That's one of even the analogies that He uses for His relationship with us, and that we are devoted to Him in the way that He is devoted to us in this marriage kind of relationship. He can't be one of my loves. He's got to be the one and only God of my life. Then my relationship is appropriate. Then it's true. Then it's right. Then it's the way that it's supposed to be. Now, here's a little something to note and just to think about, that when you follow Jesus this way, when you devote your heart to Jesus this way, you can be sure that you're going to experience a couple of different things. One of them is you will experience blessings beyond measure. Stuff that you could never, ever get from anything else. You will experience peace with God. You'll experience the peace of God. You'll experience the direction and leading of God in your life. The Holy Spirit will literally take up residence and live within you. There is nothing like that in all of creation. And yet, there's something else that you can be sure that you're going to experience. Not everyone's going to be happy that you're doing that. right? Not everyone's going to be excited. Way to go, you're following Jesus. That's so awesome. You're not going to have that kind of a thing. There are going to be some people who will attack you and maybe even persecute you for the fact that you are singularly devoted to Jesus. Did you know that in all of church history that Christians have never been persecuted for following Jesus? You're like, what are you talking about? That's the point, right? No, that's not why they were persecuted. The Christians are persecuted not for following Jesus, but for abandoning and forsaking the world, for singularly, exclusively following Jesus. Think back to the Roman Empire when the Christians were being persecuted and they were being tortured and murderously killed. The reason was they would not offer a pinch of incense to Caesar. The world doesn't care if you have Jesus. They just care if you exclusively have Jesus. They don't care. They say you can have Jesus so long as he's one of the gods that you serve, so long as he's one of the things that you do. And so there's this thing where it's as long as Jesus isn't exclusively the one who has your heart, exclusively the one who takes up residence as God and Lord and King, then we're okay with it. But as soon as you start to say Jesus is the only way, he's the only truth, he's the only life, that we are as people against him until he rescues and redeems us, now you invite persecution. Now you invite attack. As long as Jesus remains on the peripheral as one of the options, then everybody's okay. But as soon as you side with Jesus and you say what he said, and you make him exclusive and singular, now you invite attack. And that's kind of what is our big idea today as we look at Daniel chapter 3. It's this idea that dedicating your life to the one true and living God is also abandoning every other person or thing as worthy of your worship. That's the big idea as we look at Daniel 3, the first half of it, verses 1 through 18 together. So let's read that together, Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 18, and then we'll go back through and break it down together. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 says this: Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and width was 6 cubits, and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together all the satraps, administrators, governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, administrators, governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the symphony, with all kinds of music, all people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image, the gold image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, verse 8, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said, "O King Nebuchadnezzar," spoke to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O King, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that anyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp," they want to make sure that we get all of these instruments, right? Like the Lord really wants us to make sure that we understand this. "The horn, the flute, the lyre, and the psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, that shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due respect to you, due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up?" Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Today, as we look at Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 18, we're going to be looking at it in two parts. The first part is verses 1 through 7, that there's a golden image erected, or the idol of self. In verses 8 through 18, we're going to look at the golden image rejected, or the idol of acceptance. And we see these two different idols that are being brought to the forefront here in these responses to it. Now, keep in mind as we look at this, that the whole big idea is that dedicating your life to the one true and living God is simultaneously, it's at the same time, it's also abandoning every other person, every other thing as worthy of worship, that only God is worthy of worship. If somebody kills that fly, you'll be my best friend. The human heart is an idol factory. Did you know that? Your heart is an idol factory. It is constantly on full tilt, producing stuff to worship all the time. Unless Jesus occupies the seat of authority and power in your life, unless he is exalted in honor and glory, you will find something else to worship. That's just the way that it is. You have been created and designed by God to worship. That's part of the creation of who you are and the way that you've been made, that you have been designed to give worship to something. Now, when I say worship, I mean more than just singing songs. I mean that you are giving adoration and exaltation attributed to something or someone. That you're exalting something, exalting someone. That's just the way that it goes. And in this, you don't have the choice as to whether or not you will worship. You will, and you currently are in this very moment worshiping someone or something. The only thing that you have control over, the only thing that you can decide is who or what will I worship? Will I worship something or someone, or will I put Jesus where he belongs as the king of my heart? And in Daniel 3, we are shown a clear contrast between Nebuchadnezzar worshiping himself and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah worshiping God. There's this clear contrast. And so as we look at it, I pray that you would see this contrast and that God would help us to understand his word together. So let's look at this first part, verses 1 through 7, the golden image erected. Look back at verse 1. It says this: Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and width 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Chapter 3 opens up with Nebuchadnezzar erecting this huge, massive golden idol. And some scholars would even go so far as to say that it looked like him. We don't know that necessarily, but that's something that some scholars could even say about that. And in that, we're not sure exactly what it looked like, but we are given some specific details about this, that as we look at it, there's some things to pull out, some things to take note of as we think about Nebuchadnezzar's giant statue, this idol that he creates. One of them is the timing and the theme. That's something to take note of. You can't see it just in reading this, but there's a space of time between verse 49 of chapter 2 and chapter 3, verse 1. There's a space of time. Man, awesome. Good shot. There's a space of time that is about 16 years. Okay, 16 years. We know that because the Septuagint records that for us. The Septuagint tells us that this happened in the 18th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 2 gives us the time frame in verse 1 that it was the second year. So it's about 16 years of time between chapter 2's end and chapter 3's beginning. So what this means is that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah have been in captivity in Babylon for approximately 20 years, something like that. They've been there for quite some time. So when you're thinking of these guys, don't think of teenagers, think of 40-year-old men. Okay, so that's what you got to think about. They're older than you typically would have thought about as you would have maybe read through or even have thought about in the past. And in this, not only do we see that there's a time gap, but there's this time gap. It's being skipped. This time is being skipped because there's a theme that's running through. We can't understand chapter 3 as in a vacuum unto itself. We've got to understand chapter 3 in the context of chapter 2. And if you were here last week, you remember that we talked about this giant statue that was erected in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, and that Daniel gave the dream and the interpretation to him. And in that statue, the statue had 5 different kinds of materials as you progress down the statue. And so we know that that's taking place in chapter 2. And in chapter 3, we see that a giant statue is being erected. So the themes are being woven together. All right. So not only do we see the time and the theme, but also the materials that are being used. That's a detail that we have. Look at verse 1. What kind of an image did he erect? An image of gold, right? An image of gold. Now, if you remember back in verse 39, I think is where it was. Verse 37. Verse 38, right in there. Nebuchadnezzar is said that he's the head of gold, but then after him would be some silver, and then after that would be some bronze, and after that would be some iron, and then some iron and clay. And Nebuchadnezzar erects this statue of gold. Now, instead of having the 5 types of materials in chapter 2, we have 1 type of gold. Obviously, this is speaking of Nebuchadnezzar. This is him exalting himself. He's saying that, no, the whole statue is going to be all gold. And so this, in Nebuchadnezzar declaring this, he's declaring his empire to be eternal. Because it's very clear as we look at this vision that he had from last week, that the golden image was only gold at the top, and then it was brought down to iron and clay at the very bottom, and that was destroyed and completely eradicated. And then in Nebuchadnezzar establishing a statue, an idol of pure gold, he's declaring, my empire cannot fall. That I am strong enough to keep this thing going. It's purposeful rebellion to God's vision and to God's direction, because God's the one that gave him this direction and said, this is what's going to happen. And essentially, this golden image is Nebuchadnezzar saying very loudly, if God isn't for me, then I'll be for myself. I'll set up my own thing. I'll do my own empire. I'm going to do me. God, you do you. I'm going to do me. And that's what he's saying. The size, not only do we have the fact that there's a time gap and the theme and then the gold, but also the size. Notice what we're told here, that it was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. A cubit is essentially the way that they did it was by measuring a man's forearm and hand, essentially was the concept for that. So it's about 1.5 feet. All right, so 60 cubits is 90 feet. So this is not a small statue. This is massive. This is absolutely huge. In order to try to get the concept of this and help you to understand this, I think I got a picture for you. Do you have a picture for that? Yeah. So there's this summer, my family and I were able to go to D.C. That's us, the little tiny things at the bottom, standing in front of the Martin Luther King monument. So that's a pretty massive thing, not very small at all. Very, very big thing. Martin Luther King's only 30 feet tall. You got to have 2 more of him stacked on top of him to get to Nebuchadnezzar's side, okay? So when you're thinking about this, you have got to get a massive, massive thing in your head. This is not a small statement. This is absolutely epic. You would be able to see this from miles around. That when you were traveling to Babylon and you came over the hills, you would see this gleaming golden thing in the middle of the city just shining. Like a beacon all around. So it is absolutely huge what's going on here. Now we see in verses 2 and 3 that not only is this statue erected, but then Nebuchadnezzar makes this idol for himself, and he throws a big dedication party, right? 2 and 3, he basically says, I want all of the governing officials from all the provinces to come here, and I want them to be here for the dedication of this. And so he declares this and invites forcefully, right? His invitation was not a request. It's something that you had to show up to. And so he invites all the officials to come and join him for the celebration. of this. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's his reach, his empire was absolutely massive. There are some differences of opinion on exactly how far it went, and so I got a couple of images for you about how big that would be. The one on the left there, that's the one that's the most liberal of all of his possible expanse. You see that Egypt is down there in the lower left, and then Turkey up there in the upper left, comes around through half of Iran, down through half of Saudi Arabia down there. It encompasses all of Syria and Iraq and Jordan. It goes all the way up into the northern part over there. That's Georgia, where Georgia is located. So that is a massive, massive thing. Some of the more conservative ones put it in this area on the right here, not quite going into Africa and not quite going as far north or into Iran. But it's a massive, massive thing. So he's got this huge, huge place covering all of that massive expanse and space over there. And people from all of these different places, tribes and tongues and languages, are gathered together. Now, when they gather together, we see that something very specific happens. Something really, really specific takes place. Look at verse 4. A herald cries out after everyone's gathered together in the plain in front of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So you got to see this. People from all over the place, delegates are sent. They're all standing in this field in front of this massive statue. And a herald comes out and declares, to you, it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the instruments, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. And if you don't, then I'm going to throw you into a fiery furnace. Now, with all the people gathered together in front of this massive statue, you got to think of this not as just a statue per se, but more of like an obelisk. This is a massive thing by which the attention is drawn, and it's almost a piece of worship, of idol worship unto itself. But with all of them gathered together, and Nebuchadnezzar making this, the announcer tells them that they're expected to do some things. And essentially, he lays out the day's festivities. Here's what's going to happen today, guys. We are going to listen to some live music. We're going to have some group calisthenics. You guys are going to be able to get down and get up, and it's going to be awesome. And we might even have some human barbecue if the day goes well. So they're just kind of going this, there's kind of some crazy stuff that's taking place here as they're doing all of this. Now, here's what I want you to grasp with this. This whole thing is much less a religious activity and much more a test of your dedication to Nebuchadnezzar. This is a test of loyalty. This has much more to do with loyalty than it does with a religious exercise. Failure to regard Nebuchadnezzar as the one who is king and Lord and even in the position of a god is seen as treasonous and rebellious. And that's why execution is taking place. There's not so much of an emphasis on the religious aspect as much as it is the treasonous aspect. And so in this, what we see with this is that this is a common practice politically, isn't it? Where politicians mix together a religious and a political thing, and they sort of kind of make them the same thing, and they use this as a tactic to be able to employ people and to gather them to their thing. This was something that we can look back and see that Nazi Germany, that their propaganda machine did, that they did specifically targeting youth and telling them essentially going through a series of logical steps to say that if you are to serve your country, then you're serving God. And so they made this thing to where they were able to bridge the gap of insanity and get people to do crazy things by thinking that by serving Hitler, they were serving God. And they believed it, and because they believed it, they did some heinous, heinous stuff. The same tactic is used all the time with us, trying to blend politics and religion, because if you are thinking that you're serving God by serving that person, then you're willing to do crazy things. You're willing to do things that you normally wouldn't do. And so we've got to be able to distinguish and differentiate some of these things to say that I can understand that God has given people positions of power and authority, and yet I can also say that they're not necessarily God's representative, that I've got to serve them mindlessly and wholeheartedly as if I am dedicating myself to the Lord. No, not necessarily. Yes, we do need to be supportive and in line with and submissive to those who are in authority over us, but not as God himself. No, not as God himself. And so In this, we see that Isaiah 53:6 says it like this: all we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, but the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Pointing to Jesus being the real one who is to be an authority and the one who loves and cares for us. But doesn't that tell us something about ourselves? We're like sheep. We really are. We really just kind of go along with things. We really do just follow and tend to go along with things that shouldn't be. And unless the Lord gives us wisdom and unless the Lord intervenes in us and helps us to distinguish some of this stuff, we'll end up just following along with things that never should be done. Now, verse 7, we see that nearly everybody in attendance is here, and this is a pretty normal day for them. So it says at that time when the people heard the music, that all the people, nations, languages fell down and worshiped the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. I mean, up until this point, this is fairly boring, right? Like this is kind of normal and what you would expect out of the pagan world. Like they have an idol, they worship the idol. Yeah, that's kind of what you expect. There's nothing necessarily overly alarming happening in terms of what we would expect. And it was common for kings to do things like this in this day, even fairly often, to sort of test allegiances and say, are you for me or are you against me? Now, for the religious aspect, they lived in a polytheistic culture, so adding a giant statue of gold to the stuff that they worshiped anyway, just wasn't really a big deal. All right, Neb, you want me to worship your giant statue? I'm cool with that. Whatever. Let's go take it in, and you can be added to the list of gods that we worship. Also, I mean, I don't know if you've done this before, but you go to those like timeshare meetings. You got to sit in the meeting for an hour or whatever, and then they give you, you get to have this, epic vacation. So I'm sure some of them saw it that way. I mean, I got to give an hour to this giant statue. I get an all-expense paid vacation to Babylon. I'm in. I'm down for it. So it's up to this point, there's not really a whole lot going on with everybody. But that brings us to the second half of what we're looking at today. Not only is the golden image erected, or the idol of self, but also the golden image is rejected in verses 8 through 18, the idol of acceptance. Look at verse 8 with me, if you would, real quick. It says, therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that when everyone hears the sound of the instruments, they shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship the image will be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Here's three of them: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These are their Babylonian names. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Some of the Chaldeans, we're told here, go after Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They begin to attack them, and they single them out, and they say, these guys did not bow down. Now, if you're thinking about this and all of these people gathered together, it's interesting that these guys had to bring this to the attention of Nebuchadnezzar, isn't it? In the middle of them not bowing down, they weren't standing at the front protesting and saying, you're all going to burn. You're worshiping the gold image, right? They're not doing that. They're just not participating. They didn't need to draw attention to themselves. They didn't need to condemn the bad golden image. They're not even surprised that everyone's worshiping the golden image, because that's just what pagan unbelievers do. We erect stuff to worship, and if Jesus isn't at the throne of your heart, then something will be. Why not a giant golden statue? And so they're not even drawing attention to themselves. They've got to be singled out. And so as they're singled out, the Chaldeans have this issue with them. There could have been more Jews that didn't bow down. We're not told that there were or were not, but these three guys are singled out. They stood out somehow. Now, part of this is that the Chaldeans, as they bring this accusation, you see how they're contrasting themselves? Look at how good we are. We all bow down. We're for you, king. But these bad Jewish guys, they're evil. We got to kill them. They're terrible. They are against you. They're the ones who are the problem. This possibly could come from promotion envy. You remember at the end of chapter 2, the way that it ended? These three guys got promoted. right? And they've been sitting in positions of authority and power now for the last 16 years. And so the other Chaldeans didn't get promoted, and it very well could be that they're looking at these guys and having promotion envy and going after them. James 3:16 says this, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice." That this is the wisdom of the world. You deserve stuff. You're the best. Whatever they have, you should be able to take from them. Whatever you think you should have, it belongs to you. And just fill your heart with envy and self-seeking. And what the Bible says is the exact opposite. That if you do this, that's where you'll find evil and every evil practice. You'll find disorder and every evil practice. That's what happens where envy and selfish ambition lie. And so as these men are operating in this self-centered, selfish, ambitious way, we see that they're attacking these three guys. Now, verse 12, we see that the dedication of this thing brings out these three guys, certain Jews whom you've set over. Is it significant to you that we don't find Daniel's name? I mean, in Daniel's name isn't written. Now, some people want to speculate and say that, well, this must have meant that Daniel was just kind of going along with it. Maybe Daniel reasoned and he thought, it's a waste to be able to sacrifice my life for these 10 seconds of bowing down or whatever, and so I'll just participate. I think that's a pretty big stretch to say that Daniel would have participated in this. It doesn't seem consistent with his character, but his name just isn't there. It's not found. And so you ask why? I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly why, but his name just isn't there. It could very well be that he was sent away and he wasn't even in Babylon at the time. That's a possibility, but Daniel isn't there. I have a hard time thinking that Daniel participated just because his name isn't mentioned with these three guys. In this, as these guys are bowing down, it's taken as hostility toward Nebuchadnezzar. Do you see that there in verse 12? He says, "O king, they have not paid due regard to you and don't serve your God or worship the golden image." It's an assault on Nebuchadnezzar, right? The whole image thing has very little to do with the worship part of it. It has everything to do with attacking and assaulting and disrespecting Nebuchadnezzar himself. And essentially, Nebuchadnezzar had a really great brainwashing college. He was good at this. He knew how to brainwash people. He knew how to take them out of their culture and get them into his culture and get them to serve his gods. And as he did that, if you remember back in chapter 1, these four guys, Daniel and these three, did not participate. They said, we're not going to do that. And they were able to retain their honor and their life before the Lord. And their monotheism of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was. Nebuchadnezzar was surprised by the fact that they only have one God and they're only going to serve and worship their one God. Basically, Nebuchadnezzar's train of thought is, hey, I let you guys keep your God. Why don't you just add mine to your God? What's wrong with you? Why can't you guys be reasonable? Just be reasonable, add my God to your God, and we'll be all good. As long as you do that, we're fine. But it's their stance to say, no, my God is the only God that's true. Your God is make-believe, Nebuchadnezzar. Mine's the only one that's actually real and true. And so because they took that stance, they were hated and they were demonized. Today, we have a national idol in our culture. The idol that we have in our culture is the idol of acceptance. That's the idol that we face in our culture. That across our land, that this idol of acceptance is erected, and that when the praise of our national idol is sung, you are expected to bow down. You better bow down to our national idol. And there's at least three things that are taking place. There's a three-pronged attack that are happening. And what I hope to unveil in this is that this is not primarily a political thing. For Nebuchadnezzar, it was primarily a political thing. But what we see is that there's a complete spiritual reality happening behind the physical reality. And so we've got to be able to see through that as well. That there's a spiritual thing taking place. For him, for Nebuchadnezzar, it's just this loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar. It seems reasonable. But for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, there's something deeper taking place. And then in this, it's this social or political thing. It's not so much that, but it's a spiritual attack with at least three parts. Number one, the first part of the attack is to redefine or overemphasize and broad brush specific terms. That's the first part of the attack, is to take terms and change their meaning. Here's two terms that are hot button terms in our culture today that do not mean what you are being told that they mean. The first one is tolerance. Tolerance does not mean what everyone tells you that it means. The word tolerance has been redefined and overemphasized to mean something completely opposite of what it actually means. The word tolerance means the power or capacity of enduring. That's what it means. That you are enduring, that you are bearing with. This implies that the wrong is endured while you're waiting for change. That's what it implies. What the world says is, my wrong needs to be seen as just as good as whatever you think is good. That wrong is equal with good. That's what tolerance has been hijacked and redefined to mean in our culture. And this is a spiritual attack. This is not a social or political thing. This is a spiritual attack by doing this and changing all of these things. You've got to fully accept my wrong as right. That's what tolerance means in our world today. Just so you know, that's the opposite of what it actually means. Secondly, equality is the second word. The second word that is used as a weapon in a spiritual sense. Now, equality, what it actually means is the same degree of dignity or scale of being. That means that we are equally people, no matter what continent we live on, no matter what background we have, no matter what kind of family upbringing we have, we are all equally people. We all have equal dignity, equal value, equal scale of being. And essentially, equality is being redefined to mean making everything in life fair. That's what equality is being redefined to mean. Fair is not equality. It's not the same thing. Here's something. So I'm trying to teach my kids about this stuff. And one of the things that we did was we got ice cream the other night. I have two kids that are giants. They're basically the size of full-grown women. And then I've got two kids that are little, and they're half the size. And we were at the ice cream store, and I said, I'm going to give these giant children a bigger size of ice cream because proportionately, they're bigger than you. And you know what my two little kids did? Yeah, you're laughing because you know. They whined, they threw a fit, they were mad, they were freaking out. I'm a little embellishing this. Yeah, they weren't that. They were sad about it. They were not happy. And they're like, Dad, what's wrong? And I go, do you feel like that's not fair? And they're like, yeah, it's not fair. And I go, here's the lesson. Life's not fair. Right? I'm just teaching them that as we're standing here in the middle of getting ice cream. Life's not fair. They're twice your size. It is not unreasonable for me to give them twice the amount of ice cream. They're bigger than you. It's okay. But the world has this idea that everything's got to be fair. Everything's got to be fair. This is a psychotic way of thinking, okay? Here, I'm just going to try to breach the subject with you. Think on this some more. Really give some consideration to this. But psychotic way of thinking is thinking that everything is fair because equal value doesn't mean equal roles, right? Equal value does not mean equal roles. Here's an analogy or just a picture for you. I cannot think about or play or throw a football the way that Peyton Manning does, right? You would all agree with that. I just don't have his stature. I don't have his talent. I don't have his ability. I don't have the kinds of gifts that he does. And so in order to be equal with him, he's got to be less. Because no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I give attention to, no matter how many hours I put in the gym, no matter how many footballs I throw, I will never, ever, 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 you get an idea, ever be able to be as good as him. It's just not going to happen. What's not fair is he was born with stuff I wasn't born with. That's what's not fair. Now, we're not equal in those terms. Do you get that idea? We're not equal in those terms. And so, for me to cry foul and to say, it's not fair that he gets paid millions of dollars and I've got to install cable in people's houses. It's just not fair. That's ridiculous and psychotic. You're right, it's not fair. And it's okay and it's good that it's not fair. It's appropriate that it's not fair. You see, if in order to make us equal, in order for it to be fair, he would have to be knocked down. He would have to be brought lower. If we were playing football together and he was destroying me to make it fair, we'd have to take his touchdowns and make them count for me. That's how you make it fair. And that's what the world is doing right now. They're trying to take this word of equality and make it mean what it doesn't mean and say everything should be fair. No, it shouldn't. That is not appropriate. That is not right. It shouldn't be fair. And so we've got to submit ourselves to this. So that's the first one. That's our first prong. I got to go faster. Essentially what happens when you do this, when you do this idea of equality and fairness, what happens is truth becomes fluid, and then it's based on the opinion of the individual. That's why it's crazy, right? It becomes based on my opinion, not what's actually true. It becomes, well, in my opinion, I deserve more, and so I should have it, and so it's okay for me to take it away from you. No, that's crazy talk. That's crazy talk. All the people who believe that aren't willing to give anything. They just think they're going to get something. That's why it's psycho. They just want to take. They're not looking to give. And so it's a weird, no standard circular reasoning nonsense. The second prong of attack is the idea that first and foremost, you got to redefine, overemphasize broad brush specific terms. Secondly, you have to demand that you support their idol. That's what they do. That it's this idea that we're going to change these words, mean something else. Now you've got to support my idol. That they create an imaginary reality and they force you to play pretend with them. If you don't play pretend with us, you're evil and hateful and spiteful and bigoted and mean and rude. No, I just said what the truth is. No. I think 2 + 2 = yellow. Well, that's not true. That's dumb. But no, I really want to believe it. So you've got to play pretend with me and pretend like 2 + 2 = yellow. No, it always equals 4. It's always going to equal 4. It's never going to equal yellow because that's crazy talk, right? So they create a non-real reality and force you to accept their foolishness. That's the second part of this attack. They demand that you support their idol or you're hateful. Truth is fluid. Truth is based on their opinion, circular reasoning, and nonsense. The third part of this is that they shame and silence Christians. Have you noticed that it's okay to have an opinion so long as you're not Christian or conservative? And it's worse if you're both of those. Right? If you have an opinion and you're a Christian, then you're going to get attacked like crazy, especially if your opinion is to say Jesus is right and our society is crazy. You're going to be attacked like none other because you're standing for the truth, because Jesus is extremely offensive. Did you know that about Jesus? He's really, really offensive. He's very narrow. He's very exclusive. He says narrow is the way that leads to life and broad is the way that leads to destruction. He says, I'm the only way. I'm the only truth. I'm the only life. You can't set up whatever you want as your idol and think that somehow we're all God's kids. We all get in and everything pans out in the end. No, that's false teaching. That's the way that the world wants to think in order to feel good about themselves. He pops the imagination bubble. That's what Jesus does. And so nobody likes Jesus in the world. They think he's mean because the message of acceptance, the idol of acceptance that our culture has set up, the message of acceptance is this: we're all good. We all deserve good things. Just follow your heart. Isn't that the truth? Right? Watch any Disney movie. That's what you'll see. We're all good. We all deserve good things. And just follow your heart. That's the mantra. That's the preaching. That's the message of this idol of acceptance. The message of Jesus is exactly the opposite of that. The message of Jesus is that he alone is good. That you, in fact, are evil. And unless he rescues you from your evil heart, it will destroy you. Your heart's not good. It's absolutely evil. And you need Jesus to rescue you. Bowing down to our national idol is not going to bring the lost to Jesus. Just saying it's all good for you and we're just in the name of love, we're just going to accept everybody and make it. No. I mean, yeah, we can accept people and say you're equally a person and we love you and we value you, but I'm still not going to accept your sin and call it good. That's crazy. Sin is evil. If I'm going to call your sin good, then why in the world did Jesus go to the cross? Why does that matter at all if you're just okay the way that you are? No, that is to bring reproach on the name and cross of Jesus. And for us to do that, to bow down to the national idol and to not prop Jesus up to where he belongs, that causes us to abandon him. The same way that I would in committing adultery on my wife be abandoning her. It's the same thing. That's why the Bible, when it equates this idea of adultery or idol worship, it calls it adultery, because that's what it is. Because God alone deserves that part of our heart and part of our lives. So verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar is not very happy. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, right? That's more than disappointment. You get that idea? He's not just like, oh, I'm just sort of disappointed that you guys didn't do this. Oh, that makes me sad. No, he's filled with rage and disappointment. And so he says, I need those guys to come stand before me. Right? He doesn't delegate this to some low-level administrator or something. You guys go handle that. No, get those men, bring them before me. Now, this is a true test for these three guys, right? Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah. This is where the test, it's one thing to stand for the Lord. It's another thing to remain standing for the Lord, right? This is where the true test comes in. Think of Peter. Remember when Peter, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he said, Jesus, I'll die with you. And he dedicated himself to Jesus. And so Jesus is arrested and taken away. And even though all of the other disciples fled, Peter follows Jesus. And he's there. Peter and John are there in the temple courtyard, and they're together. And there's Jesus over there. He's being tried. He's being beaten. And 3 times, Peter denies even knowing who Jesus is. It's one thing to make a stand for the Lord. It's another thing to remain standing for the Lord. So now here, as these three guys are brought before Nebuchadnezzar, this is where the true test comes in. Now that you're in front of your peers and you're in front of this emperor, what are you going to do? Are you going to hold fast? You're going to hold fast? And that's basically what Nebuchadnezzar does. Verse 14, he says, is it true? Isn't that reasonable of him? That's wise and reasonable. Here's what I heard. I want to hear it from your mouth. Is it true, these guys, did you not worship my idol? And he says, I'll give you another shot. I'll give you another chance. It could be a misunderstanding. So he gives them one more shot and gives them a test at this and to make a stand. And so Nebuchadnezzar, in this, he gives him this chance. And then he says, notice at the end of verse 15, and who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? He's so self-absorbed that he thinks that he is more powerful than the supernatural spiritual reality, right? Like he is so absorbed with himself, and he's got this huge idol, and he's like, I'm a god, because that's what everyone told him, and he believed it. He believed his own press clippings. Don't do that, right? You're not as awesome as everyone says you are, or as you think you are. So he believes his own press clippings, and he raises himself up and says, I'm great. Why don't you guys think I'm great? I'm going to have to kill you if you don't say I'm awesome. And so in this, he lets him say this. In verse 16, notice their response. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king and said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. In the face of this intimidation of Nebuchadnezzar and their peers, the three stand strong. You see, this didn't come from this moment. They didn't make this decision right there in the moment to stand strong. This came from chapter 1, verse 8. Remember when Daniel purposed in his heart that he wouldn't defile himself? These three guys were part of that purposing. This was part of who they were. This was part of their saying, I'm dedicated to the Lord, not only when there's the limelight showing, but in the times when no one else knows. They're fully dedicated to the Lord at all times. And because of that, when the pressure is on, when it's hard, when it's difficult, when there's social pressures, they stand. They don't crumble. They don't fall, not because they're so awesome, but because the grace of God rushes to the humble. That's why. And God sustains them through it. And so in this, they confirm their previously held stance in 3 ways in verses 16, 17, and 18. Verse 16, they confirm their purpose in the one true God. See that in verse 16? We don't have need to answer you in this, Nebuchadnezzar. You're not God. We have a God. He's not you. They don't doubt that God uses the small things to do big works, and that their faithfulness is what matters most. That's what they believe. They don't doubt God in the middle of this. They hold fast to the Lord, and they know that even if it's just this 10 seconds, it matters because this is who we are in part of our lives. and our dedication and faithfulness to the Lord. Secondly, in verse 17, they confirm their confidence in the one true God. See that there? God's able to deliver us. And notice it says he'll deliver us from your furnace or any other crazy you think up, bro. See that there at the end? And he's able to deliver us from anything else, from your hand. So it doesn't matter what you do, God's able to deliver us. That they don't doubt that God sees and he's more powerful than Nebuchadnezzar's fire or any possible persecution. They don't doubt God's power and strength and ability in the face of all this. And in verse 18, they confirm their devotion to the one true God. They don't doubt or presume to know God's plan. It might be different than their desires, but God remains good. Notice that there in verse 18, that when it says, but if not, that's not like this lapse of faith, to say, well, maybe God doesn't really like us that much. No, that's to say, I'm not presuming to know what God's going to do here. Even if God allows you to throw us into the fire and we die, that doesn't change who God is. It doesn't make God bad. It means you're evil, Neb. That's what it means. It doesn't mean God's bad. It means you're bad. It says, they're basically saying that if God chooses not to save us and rescue us from this, he's still good. He's still worthy of my praise. Even if it costs me everything, even my life, God is still good. God is still worthy of honor and praise. You see, it's possible to justify adding things to our worship of God, but it's impossible to do it in truth because he's all in. He's an all-in kind of, didn't Jesus prove that by going to the cross? He said, my relationship with you is an all-in kind of relationship with you. I'm not just going to do it halfway. I'm not just going to show you, I'm not just going to come to earth and live a perfect life and say, look, it can be done, figure it out. Wouldn't that be terrible? Right? It'd be like, yeah, you're right. I'm still lost. But he took your sin, went to the cross on your behalf, and paid for it with his own blood. Because that's how all in he is in this relationship. And for us to give him half-hearted, half measures, it's not appropriate. It's not right. It's not right to add him to our list of gods. It's only right for us to abandon everything else and only pursue him. That is the only thing that's true and right and appropriate. You see, this morning I want to leave you with a couple of questions to consider. We're going to leave these up on the screen as we have a time of communion after service and everything. I just want you to consider these questions. Really prayerfully consider these, because I think that we can see ourselves in Nebuchadnezzar, like he's not the bad guy. I should see myself in Nebuchadnezzar. That's my tendency. That's who I am. I love me. I exalt me. We should also see ourselves in, if you're a follower of Jesus, in the three guys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those guys and what they did. So here's the questions. What idols are you building, just like Nebuchadnezzar? What idols are you building that are in direct rebellion to the direction of God for your life? What are you building? Remember in chapter 2, God gave him a vision. This is the direction I have for your life. This is my plan. And he built an idol in direct rebellion to God's plan, saying, no, I will do my thing. I'm going to do me. What idols are you building? Secondly, question is, what cultural forces are like these three guys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are pressuring you to abandon the Lord in order to be accepted by people? So think through those, pray over those, ask God to give you direction on these things. Because if you walk away saying, I don't really have anything to answer for that, you're deceiving yourself. You're deceiving yourself. This is stuff that's in every human heart. And unless we deal with these things and root them out completely, then we are going to be left to abandon the Lord and seek our own devices. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for today and the chance to pursue you and your word, to understand you. And we thank you so much for just this clear picture of idolatry and what it does to us. Lord, I pray that you would help us to recognize the idols that are in our lives. Whether they are really little and just barely starting off, or they've been there for years and we've held on to them and protected them and guarded them. Lord, show us where we are worshiping something other than you. Give us the strength to cast it down and to abandon it and to recognize it for what it is, that it's lifeless, it's foolish, it has nothing in it, and that we are in desperate need of you. God, show us where we are being pressured by our culture to forsake you, that the threat of people attacking us or coming against us or even persecuting us, Lord, that it causes us to abandon you. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to get out of that squishy middle and be completely devoted, firmly rooted and grounded in you. You're worthy of our praise, God, and we want to worship you. So we ask that you would help us to do so in Jesus' name. Amen.